Hi, and welcome to today's podcast. Today, I'll be discussing plastic pollution and whether we're dealing with it correctly, specifically looking at it through the context of the UN's new resolution on plastic pollution, which was published in March of this year. I spoke to Dan Wilson, who's a PhD student from the University of Exeter. His research is currently focused on plastics in the Southern Ocean and their impacts. He's currently using technology called ocean parcels, which is a tracking technology looking at where plastics are coming from and how they're getting there. The main aim of his research, he hopes that his research can further other research on limiting plastics getting into our oceans and into our ocean currents. And I also managed to get his take on plastic policies today. So when I spoke to Dan, we discussed why current policies and why action has been so ineffective and unsuccessful in the past. And he argued that often politicians deal with the low-hanging fruit, the easiest things to deal with, like plastic straws and bags and microbeads, which in the grand scheme of things aren't the main cause of the issue. They're obviously part of the issue, but part of a very large-scale issue which needs to be dealt with from the start to the end, not just pick and choosing. So when we look at the UN's draft resolution of plastic pollution, its full name being End Plastic Pollution Towards an International Legally Binding Instrument, we hope that we can see more impactful policies being made for our future. So to paraphrase the resolution, its aim is to basically emphasise the need for international cooperation to assess the full life cycle of plastics and to come up with ways to reduce plastics' impact on our environment from start to finish of the product of the material, which already sounds quite promising. And this will be done through a proposed intergovernmental negotiating committee. I assume one much like the COP conferences or one much like the IPCC, both of which deal with climate change. But obviously this committee will be dealing with plastic pollution, and when you think about climate change, often plastic pollution kind of comes hand in hand, but obviously this new resolution will be solely focusing on plastic, and this will hopefully be beneficial. So that being said, in relation to climate change, Inga Anderson, the executive director of the UNEP, stated that the new plastic resolution is the most significant environmental multilateral deal since the Paris Accord, which is a big statement in itself. It could be considered as quite ironic, seeing as many of the pledges made in Paris in 2015, those targets are not being met by countries. So it's questionable to argue that the Paris Agreement has been significant or successful, so I don't know how well that bodes for end plastic pollution. I guess one of the main differences between the Paris Accord and the End Plastic Resolution is that End Plastic Resolution is meant to be legally binding, whereas the Paris Agreement is an agreement. It's more of an encouragement. It's not legally binding. Countries are encouraged to pledge to make these changes to their carbon emissions, but they're not legally pressured to follow through, which is why it's not being met, and why it's quite easy for countries to pull out, which we saw with Trump in 2017. When he came into office, he pulled the US out of the Paris Agreement due to his beliefs on climate change, and that pulled out funding for these climate change policies. But like I said, the good thing about the plastic resolution is that even in the title it says it's working towards an international legally binding instrument, which suggests that there will be more regimented and more controlled policies that will be implemented because they will become law, or at least that's what it's suggesting. So reading the new resolution, it does sound promising. It's engaging the international community, which in relation to Dan's research, that's important because he's looking at where plastics are coming from. Plastics can come from any country. It can come from one part of the world and move through ocean currents to another part of the world. So really it holds everyone accountable, this new resolution. The resolution wants to look at the whole life cycle of the product, it wants to look at the involvement and input from scientific research, it wants more funding, and it wants to increase education on the matter. The challenges that they may face, though, for the resolution is it's a big ask. The title is End Plastic Pollution. That's a very, very, very big task when you think about it. And if you think about it being an international movement, different countries have different resources available to them. They'll have different abilities to enact change. So it's kind of negotiating how that will work out in the future. Or there are concerns about how legally binding this will be. There's a clause that states further recognising that each country is best positioned to understand its own national circumstances, including its stakeholder activities related to addressing the plastic pollution, which that kind of suggests that there could be loopholes for those who kind of don't want to commit as much to addressing plastic pollution as an issue. So that is a problem that may come about. So I think over the next couple years, everyone's eyes will be on this resolution and we'll be looking to see what action it actually takes. Plastic is has a huge impact on our environment, from the smallest of organisms like zooplankton and phytoplankton to larger mammals in the ocean, through bioaccumulation, through false satiation, and it's affecting human health now in our bloodstreams and in our women's fetuses, affecting fetal growth. So this policy will have huge impacts towards the future, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to this podcast and learnt something a little bit about how we're dealing with plastic pollution today.